Russia has 40 icebreakers patrolling the Arctic right now. 40? America has 3. And last July, one of them caught fire. The other was already in dry dock. That means the entire United States polar fleet was completely sidelined while Russia kept moving. But here's what nobody's telling you about why that actually matters. While every news channel had your eyes glued to Ukraine, while every headline was about missiles and tanks and European borders, Russia just seized control of something worth far more than any territory they could ever take in Eastern Europe. We're talking about a region holding 90 billion barrels of undiscovered oil, 30% of the world's natural gas, and over $1 trillion in rare earth minerals. The same minerals in your phone right now. The same resources that power every electric vehicle. And Russia just locked down the only route to reach them. America slept. And the gap might already be too wide to close. Let me explain what we're actually talking about here, because the Arctic isn't just ice and polar bears. Russia controls 53% of the entire Arctic Ocean coastline. That's not a small advantage. That's dominant geographical positioning over the single most resource-rich region that's about to open up on planet Earth. The Arctic holds an estimated 90 billion barrels of undiscovered oil. That's 13% of all the oil left to find in the world. It contains 1,669 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. That's 30% of all undiscovered natural gas on Earth. We're talking about more oil than Saudi Arabia has in proven reserves right now. But it's not just about energy. The Arctic contains approximately $1 trillion worth of rare earth minerals. These are the materials that make your smartphone work. The components in electric vehicle batteries, the magnets in wind turbines, the technology that every advanced military system depends on. Neodymium, praseodymium, dysprosium, terbium. If Alaska were its own country, it would rank in the top 10 globally for rare earth reserves. There are over 150 prospective rare earth deposits in Alaska alone. So when I say Russia just seized the Arctic, I'm talking about them locking down access to the future of technology, energy, and global trade. And then there's the route itself. The Northern Sea Route is a 5,600-kilometer shipping corridor that runs along Russia's Arctic coast, connecting Europe and Asia. Right now, if you want to ship goods from China to Europe, you go through the Suez Canal. That takes about 40 days. The Northern Sea Route cuts that down to 20 days. That's a 15-day reduction. A 40% decrease in shipping time. In September 2025, a Chinese container ship made the first ever direct voyage from China to the United Kingdom via the Arctic. 20 days total. The traditional southern route would have taken over 40. This isn't some theoretical future possibility. This is happening right now. In 2024, the Northern Sea Route moved 37.9 million tons of cargo. That's an all-time record. Container traffic between Russia and China more than doubled in 2025. The route saves shipping companies 40% on fuel costs because the distance is so much shorter. Climate change is melting Arctic ice faster than anywhere else on the planet, and that's opening up access to this route year after year. Whoever controls this route controls a massive percentage of future global trade. And right now, that's Russia. So, how did Russia actually lock this down? Let's start with the hardware. Russia operates 40 icebreakers. 8 of them are nuclear-powered. These aren't normal ships. Nuclear icebreakers can break through 3 meters of solid ice. They can operate for 7 years without refueling. They produce virtually zero carbon emissions while running. Russia has been building these for decades. The newest ones, the Project 2220 class, are the most powerful icebreakers on the planet right now. Each one has 2 Iridium-200 reactors. Russia just launched the Yakutia in April 2025. They're currently building the Leningrad, the Chukotka, and the Stalingrad. They're also constructing the Rossiya, which will be the single most powerful icebreaker ever built. This isn't a program. This is an entire fleet purpose-built for Arctic dominance. But it's not just ships. In 2024, Russia completed a brand new military airbase on Kotelny Island. It's called Temp Air Base. The runway is 2,100 meters long and 130 meters wide. It can handle every type of Russian military aircraft, except the absolute largest cargo planes. That includes long-range interceptors. That includes nuclear-capable bombers. This base sits right along the Northern Sea Route. Russia also operates the Northern Trefoil Base, this massive cloverleaf-shaped facility that houses troops year-round in the Arctic. They've installed S-400 surface-to-air missile systems on Arctic islands, Pantsir short-range missile systems, Bastion P coastal defense systems with anti-ship cruise missiles. In September 2024, Russia conducted the Zapad 2025 military exercises and sealed off huge sections of the Barents Sea, including parts of Norway's exclusive economic zone. They practiced cruise missile launches over the Arctic. This is a fully militarized region under Russian control. Now here's where it gets even more significant. The Northern Sea Route moved a record 37.9 million tons of cargo in 2024. But Russia's target for 2035 is 130 million tons. They're planning to more than triple the volume, and they're doing it with China. Container traffic between Russia and China doubled in 2025. 17 container voyages transported 280,000 tons of cargo just in the first part of 2025. In October 2025, Russia and China signed a formal action plan to jointly develop the Northern Sea Route. This isn't casual cooperation. This is a strategic partnership to control the future of Arctic shipping. China is funding Russian Arctic energy infrastructure. Russia produces 80% of its natural gas from the Arctic. 17% of its oil comes from the Arctic. The Arctic accounts for 7.5% of Russia's entire GDP. In 2024 alone, China purchased nearly 2 million tons of Russian Arctic crude oil. These aren't just numbers. This is a functioning economic system that's already operational and growing every single year. Russia created a maritime collegium in August 2024, headed by Nikolai Patrushev, one of Putin's closest advisors. Its stated mission is to preserve Russia's status as a great naval power. The Arctic is ranked as Russia's #2 strategic priority region, right after Ukraine. They've expanded the Arctic zone of the Russian Federation to include more territory, more municipalities, more resource access. They're not planning for the future. They're operating in the present with a 20-year head start. And what has America been doing? America has 3 icebreakers. 3. The Polar Star was commissioned in 1976. It's 49 years old. It was designed to last 30 years. It's 19 years past its expected service life. The Healy is newer, but it's had serious fires in both 2020 and 2024. Then there's the Storis, which the Coast Guard just purchased in 2024 as a desperate stopgap measure. It's a commercial vessel that was retrofitted. It hasn't even been fully tested for icebreaking yet. In July 2024, the Healy caught fire during what was supposed to be a critical Arctic patrol. Electrical fire in the engine room. Mission-ending damage. It had to limp back to Seattle on reduced power. At that exact same time, the Polar Star was in dry dock for maintenance. That meant the entire United States polar icebreaker fleet, every single operational vessel, was completely offline. Russia kept operating. America went dark. Now let me tell you what this actually means, because this isn't just about who has more ships in the Arctic. This is about economic control, military vulnerability, and technological dependence on adversaries. When Russia and China control the Northern Sea Route, they control a shipping corridor that offers a 30 to 40% cost reduction compared to traditional routes. Every company that uses that route pays Russia for access, for icebreaker escort services, for permission to transit Russian waters. Russia doesn't just own the ships, they own the entire route. It's the maritime equivalent of what China did in the South China Sea. Except this time it's actually legal under international law, because it runs through Russia's territorial waters. Any ship that wants to save 15 days and 40% on fuel costs has to play by Russian rules. That gives Moscow leverage over global supply chains that they've never had before. And those rare earth minerals I mentioned earlier? America is sitting on them but can't access them. Alaska has over 150 prospective rare earth deposits. If Alaska were its own country, it would rank in the top 10 globally for reserves of these critical materials. The United States Arctic holds an estimated 30 billion barrels of oil and more than 220 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. That's roughly $1 trillion in rare earth minerals alone, not counting the energy resources. But here's the problem. Without icebreakers, without infrastructure, without the ability to operate year-round in Arctic conditions, those resources might as well be on Mars. Russia can access theirs. They've been building the infrastructure for 20 years. America can't reach its own Arctic resources, while Russia and China are actively extracting and shipping theirs. China purchased nearly 2 million tons of Russian Arctic crude oil in 2024. That's not a future scenario. That's revenue flowing right now from Arctic resources to fund Russian operations, while American resources sit frozen and untouched. Now let's talk about the military implications, because this gets worse. The Kola Peninsula in northwestern Russia houses the Northern Fleet, Russia's most powerful naval force. It's home to nuclear submarine bases. Russia has deployed Bastion P coastal defense systems in the Arctic. These are mobile anti-ship cruise missile launchers. They've installed S-300 and S-400 surface-to-air missile systems on Arctic islands. In July 2024, a Ukrainian drone struck the Olenia Air Base inside the Arctic Circle. That base is over 1,000 miles from Ukraine. The fact that Ukraine could reach it proves both how vulnerable Russian Arctic bases are and how seriously Russia takes Arctic defense if they're stationing strategic bombers that far north. After Finland and Sweden joined NATO, there are now 7 out of 8 Arctic nations in the alliance. That sounds like an advantage for the West, but it also means NATO now shares over 2,000 kilometers of Arctic border with Russia. Moscow calls this hostile encirclement. Whether that's justified or not, it's how they're framing their military buildup. And that buildup is real. Then there's China. Beijing claims to be a near-Arctic state, even though Harbin, China's northernmost major city, is at the same latitude as Venice, Italy. That hasn't stopped China from building 5 icebreakers with more on the way. They're developing nuclear-powered icebreakers. In 2023, Chinese and Russian naval vessels conducted a joint patrol near Alaska's Aleutian Islands. That was a message. China calls this the Polar Silk Road. They're investing billions in Russian Arctic energy projects because Western sanctions cut Russia off from European financing. Russia needs China's money. China needs Russia's resources and route access. Container traffic between the two countries doubled in 2025. They signed a formal cooperation agreement in October 2025 to jointly develop Northern Sea Route infrastructure. This isn't a temporary partnership of convenience. This is a long-term strategic alignment between the two biggest U.S. adversaries, and it's happening in America's weakest theater. Here's what happens if this continues. Russia controls the choke point for Arctic shipping the same way Egypt controls Suez. China gets unrestricted access to rare earth minerals without any Western interference. American technology companies become dependent on supply chains that run through Russian-controlled waters. The U.S. military has a massive vulnerability on its northern flank, with no ability to project power or maintain presence. Climate change continues to melt Arctic ice, which means longer navigation seasons, which means more traffic, which means more revenue and control for whoever got there first. And Russia got there first. They got there 20 years ago. Every year of American delay is another year Russia extends an infrastructure lead that becomes harder to overcome. By 2030, when the U.S. might have 4 or 5 new icebreakers operational, Russia will likely have over 50. The window for competitive response is closing fast. So, why did America let this happen? How does the world's most powerful military, the country with the largest economy, the nation that won the Cold War, end up with 3 icebreakers while Russia built 40? This wasn't an accident. This was 50 years of systematic neglect. The Polar Star was commissioned in 1976. That was 49 years ago. Since then, the United States has built exactly 2 more polar icebreakers. 2 in half a century. This isn't about some recent policy failure. This is generational institutional blindness to a threat that was always coming. The Coast Guard knew. Military strategists knew. But the Arctic was always treated as a remote, frozen wasteland that didn't matter because the ice made it inaccessible. Except climate change was making it accessible, year after year, and everyone just kept assuming there was more time. There's also a bureaucratic nightmare at the core of this. Icebreakers in America fall under the Coast Guard, not the Navy. The Coast Guard's budget is a fraction of the Defense Department's. They're responsible for search and rescue, drug interdiction, port security, and somehow also maintaining a polar fleet capable of strategic competition with Russia. Meanwhile, Russia and China both put their icebreakers under direct naval command. They treat them as military assets for strategic power projection. America treats them as Coast Guard utility vehicles. When budget cuts come, icebreakers lose to aircraft carriers and submarines every single time because they're not seen as warfighting platforms. That's the structural reason this happened. It wasn't incompetence. It was a fundamental misunderstanding of what the Arctic would become. But something changed in 2024. In July, when both U.S. icebreakers went offline simultaneously, it forced a reckoning. The Pentagon released its 2024 Arctic Strategy. For the first time, the document explicitly named Russia and China as threats in the Arctic and called for urgent capability development. In October 2024, General C.Q. Brown, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, flew to Iceland for an Arctic Chiefs of Defense conference. Russia wasn't invited. That was the first time Arctic nations met to discuss security without Moscow at the table, since the Ukraine invasion in February 2022. Then, in July 2024, the United States, Canada, and Finland signed the ICE Pact, the icebreaker collaboration effort. It's a trilateral agreement to share expertise, coordinate production, and build icebreakers faster than any one nation could alone. In October 2025, President Trump signed a memorandum authorizing the construction of up to 4 Arctic security cutters to be built in Finland with delivery as early as 2028. The total plan calls for 11 new icebreakers. 4 from Finland, 7 built domestically with Finnish technical assistance. Total cost, $6.1 billion. Is it enough? Probably not. By the time those ships are operational, Russia will have added even more to their fleet. The first U.S. polar security cutter, which was supposed to be delivered in 2024, is now projected for 2030. That's a 6-year delay on a program that was already late. The cost exploded from $2.3 billion in 2019 to over $5 billion by 2024. Even if everything goes perfectly from here, America is playing catch-up on a 20-year infrastructure deficit. But at least the response has finally started. At least there's money committed, contracts signed, and ships actually being built. The question isn't whether America can compete in the Arctic. The question is whether America will sustain the political will and funding to actually follow through over the next decade. Or whether this becomes just another delayed program that gets cut when the news cycle moves on to something else. So let's bring this back to what it actually means for you. Russia has 40 icebreakers. America has 3. One caught fire last July. While you were watching Ukraine dominate every news cycle, Russia systematically locked down control of a $1 trillion resource zone and the most strategic shipping route that's opening up on the planet. They built the infrastructure. They militarized the region. They partnered with China. And they did it over 20 years while America built nothing. The rare earth minerals in your smartphone right now, the battery technology in electric vehicles, the components that make renewable energy possible, those all depend on materials that increasingly come from regions Russia and China now control. Your future economy, your national security, your technological independence, all of it is tied to whether America can access Arctic resources or whether you become dependent on adversaries for the materials that run modern civilization. The United States finally woke up. The ICE Pact is real. $6.1 billion is committed. 11 icebreakers are planned. The first one could arrive by 2028 if everything stays on track. But here's the thing. This only continues if people actually care. If the public pressure stays on. If this doesn't become another program that gets quietly delayed and defunded the moment the news cycle shifts to the next crisis. The reason you probably never heard about this before right now is because Arctic policy doesn't generate clicks. It doesn't trend on social media. It doesn't make for dramatic cable news segments. It's slow-moving infrastructure competition in a frozen region most people will never see. But it matters more than almost anything else happening in geopolitics right now. Because whoever controls the Arctic controls the resources and trade routes that will define the rest of this century. So if this opened your eyes to something you didn't know was happening, share it. Send it to someone who still thinks the only thing that matters is what's trending on cable news. Subscribe if you want more of the stories they're not telling you, the strategic shifts happening while everyone's distracted by whatever manufactured outrage is dominating your feed this week. Because I guarantee you, the next crisis is already forming, and nobody's watching. Russia has 40 icebreakers. America has 3. The question is, what else are you missing?